Hey Internet, it's RJ. Welcome back. Thanks for tuning into this show today. Now today's episode, we're going to answer the question, why do banks ask you so many questions when you sign up? Whether it be for a credit card, deposit account, brokerage account, you name it. Banks seem to be getting nosier and nosier every day. So why do they ask these questions? And better yet, do you actually have to answer them? So of course, if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead, press the subscribe button, and let's get to work. Now to start off here, the world has a ton of cliches. Credit and finance is no different, but there's one cliche that I do believe in, and that is never ask where the money came from. Except banks violate this cliche all the time. So do the banks really care where the money comes from and why you're doing what you're doing? Well, the answer is no, but also yes. So we'll go through the reasons and it'll make sense in the end. So I would say, there's these questions kind of break up into three different buckets, if you will. There's like the onboarding, chit chat, cross-selling type questions. There's something called know your customer, know your client, KYC for short. There's questions about that. And then there's kind of like investigatory follow-up questions, if you will, right? So we'll go through all three of them and we'll kind of cover why they don't care, but they do care. Then some tips that you can use on the back end. So the first one here is the chit-chatty type questions. Predominantly, if you go in branch to open up an account or a card, the banker's going to ask you questions. And part of it is simply because sitting there in silence in someone's office is kind of awkward sometimes. They're people, they're trained to be people, but they are salespeople as well. Again, a banking floor is a sales floor, just no different than like a car dealership or something like that, except they're not selling you physical product per se, but they are making sales. So you can be in the banker's office and they'll just chat you up. Do you live around here? Do you own? Do you rent? Maybe not as direct as that, but really they're going through, in their head qualifying questions. If you tell me you're renting, well, then I'm defaulting to my mortgage products potentially. If you tell me that you own, then I'm defaulting to my equity products or my refi products, or you're thinking about moving. How much money you're going to deposit today. If it's a ton of money that you're moving over, then I'm going to go get wealth management across the hall. Where do you bank at currently? What products are you interested in? You get the point, right? These questions are fine. Do you have to answer them? No. It's going to be pretty awkward if you just like stonewall them. So here, somebody say, you can ask them. I think it's worth looking at and asking people if they can beat your rate, beat your product, whatever it is. You never know, because again, there could be more introductory offers to be had. And if you're new here, we primarily go in branch to open products because I'm a firm believer you should never open a banking product unless you're paid to do so, be a promotional offer. So it's not uncommon for me to sit down and, I'll cut to the chase and be very direct. Say, hey, what other promotional offers do you have going on right now? You'd be surprised. Sometimes there's a tie-in. You're there to open a checking account. Sometimes there's a tie-in to a savings account. Sometimes there's a tie-in to a money market. Sometimes, if you're opening a bank account, they'll give you a credit card with a promotional offer. So if you're into that, it's worth asking. Now, if you don't want to get into this at all for whatever reason, then I would simply just steer the conversation in another direction. Do what everyone else does, which is the most boring topic I can think of, which is talk about the weather, which personally I hate when people talk about the weather, but again, I sit inside in a dark room all day, so, I don't care that it's sunny outside, but, that usually gets the job done. So those questions, again, optional. You can use them to your advantage, but, primarily optional exploratory research questions. Now it gets a little bit more serious with know your customer, KYC, know your client, however you want to do the acronym. So, first of all, what is KYC? Well, the high level of it is, again, just going off of the interpretation of the rule, what it's meant to do. We can debate if it actually is successful or not another time. But what it's trying to say is the government saying, hey, look, we cannot possibly monitor everyone. Again, they probably could, but, again, spirit of the rule. We can't monitor everyone and where all the money's going. So to, help against anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism, things like that, banks, you are now responsible for knowing where this money is coming from before you bank it. And banking money is a fancy way of saying before you deposit new money. So examples of this is why you have to give like 2 forms of ID, social security number. Like you have to have an address. Sometimes you'll have to actually have proof of address, things like that. These are the questions. Where does your money come from? If you employed, self-employed, what have you. They'll ask you about wires. Do you plan on doing overseas wires, international wires? How much do you plan on wiring? How much cash do you end up depositing? Things like that. So that is part of it. They have to go through and collect this information because they need to have reasonable assurance where the money is coming from. Because if not, and they end up banking like some type type of illegal money, they will definitely be held liable. I mean, they're all going to go after you too, but the bank is going to get hit with the hardest fine. So that's part of the reason why they ask that. Now, in addition to that, banks really don't care for risk, especially larger banks, because larger banks are like, hey, I'm fine. I have trillions of dollars. You talk about the power 5 of banking being Chase, Bank of America, Citi, Wells Fargo. You could put U.S. Bank in there as well, your Power 5 of banking. They have so much money that they don't really need to take on risky, adventures, right? They don't need, for example, the adult entertainment industry is always, throwing red flags for this stuff. Cannabis, pot, marijuana, whatever you want to call it, that industry, gaming is another one, because you get into, banks have national bank charters and you get into state versus federal laws. If you've ever done FanDuel, the app, or the other, I mean, they're all the same really, but like FanDuel is the one that comes to mind. You have to, before you can start playing and placing bets, it has to verify your location to make sure you're in a state that allows it. Sometimes they're screening for that. If you're opening a business account, they're asking you type of business, things like that. They just don't want to be bothered. Now, unfortunately, they'll never outright tell you, hey, we don't do business with like this group of people. They'll just simply say, hey, we can't help you with your banking needs. So you'll know when you get to these questions. I mean, online, you'll just answer them in check boxes yourself. If you're in branch, the banker will usually kind of straighten up in their chair a little bit and kind of have an abrupt break in whatever you're talking about to our first question. Say, hey, I need to ask you these questions. And they're just asking the same exact questions. Now, once again, do you have to answer them? No, you don't have to, but if you choose not to, well, they can't proceed with their process and procedure, and they'll just send you on your way. So it's kind of one of those yes, but also no type things if you want to deal with the product. Now, of course, different products have different questions. They do need your credit score and stuff for credit card is where they don't necessarily need that for a bank account, but that's the general gist of know your customer. Now, the last bucket here is what I would call investigative questions. So sometimes if you play this game aggressively or you have what the bank could perceive as like risky behavior, they can ask you follow-up questions that are not necessarily know your customer. So for example, if you're familiar with the Amex Financial Review, where you can trigger an Amex Financial Review on your cards by maybe you check the purchase power tool too much, or maybe you have just 1 month of super high spend in Vegas or what have you, and they request 4506T, which is a request for them to get your tax return information. Again, that's not part of know your customer, but they can request it. You can again decline, but they're likely going to shut you down because you chose not to go through with their process. I've had a few banks ask me various questions. If you're transferring money out of Chase is very sensitive, so sometimes they'll call or you'll have to call them, and they'll how long have you owned this account for, how much money is in this account, things like that. Again, that's not know your customer. That's the risk management, trying to do their process. Again, it goes back to know your customer because, again, the part of the reason they ask these questions, especially the KYC and these investigative questions, is usually when you open a new account, like bank accounts are subject to or susceptible, I should say, to potential fraud. I mean, like usually when they're brand new, the first 6 months and things like that. So if you're like me, you open a ton of different bank accounts, it can seem, suspect that you open up an account and then you're trying to transfer money back and forth, even if, you open an account with Chase. Of course, you want to fund it, right? But Chase is notorious for flagging it even though you just opened it. So why wouldn't I want to fund it? Because if you're trying to get away with, laundering a bunch of money, you can open up a bunch of different accounts potentially. That's dangerous. So they don't want to be a part of that. So those are kind of the general buckets of questions. Now, overall, you might be wondering, well, do they verify this information? Generally, no, but they can. So I always say the more serious the banking product, the more they verify. So if you think about sitting down to sign a mortgage, you have a notary there to verify your ID with their eyes, and watch you sign it. From there, we get less and less serious, right? However, there's always, a checkbox that says you certify that this information is true. I think it's called a hold harmless document, which basically says if you're caught lying to us, it's your fault, not our fault. We can just go after you. It's really just a document that helps the bank, remove accountability, liability, and responsibility from themselves, things that banks love to put off on other people. Again, you cannot get away with not signing that because they're not going to accept liability. And again, if they did check and verify this stuff, I mean, no one would want to go through more than just 2 forms of ID, which is, a driver's license and like signing the back of a credit card counts, right? So, yes, I would still just be accurate because they can check. Again, they can be very aggressive in the case of Amex with the 4506T and get the information directly from the IRS. Now, in addition to that, I would say, again, you're going to have to answer these questions everywhere. I understand not everyone likes them. I get it. But it's just kind of how it's going to be. Additionally, I'd say you don't need to provide any more information than the question. Usually these questions, especially in KYC, are yes/no answers. There's no reason to elaborate or add any context. You know, when I was going through buying a house for the first time, I think they call them declaration questions. And one of the questions is like, you know, to the best of your knowledge, is there any like damage, like water damage or something, right? You do it over the phone. And I'd say, well, you know, a home inspector will verify that. They don't care. That's not an option. You can't hedge. I love hedging a good answer. Again, corporate America, you never want to commit. You always want to say, I recommend, or maybe, or possibly give yourself an out. I understand, but there's no text field that allows them to type in an answer. It's a yes or no. So me trying to hedge, even though there will be a home inspector, even though I'm not qualified to answer that, there's not a way around to answer it if you want to get the mortgage, right? So obviously there's no need to volunteer any additional information. Just yes and no is fine, answer the questions and move on. If sometimes I'll even help you out a little bit with them, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. So that is why the bank asks you so many nosy questions. Again, not much we can do about it. Overall, I'd say you just kind of get used to it as you play this game pretty aggressively. So, of course, let me know down below how you feel about the questions, especially the chit chat questions. Do you like those? Have you used them to your advantage? I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this one. So, of course, if you liked it, drop me a thumbs up down below. If you find it particularly interesting, consider subscribing to the channel. We're posting content just like this every single week and right back here every Sunday with all the news you can use in the week that was in credit and finance. Again, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next one.